Hi, my name is Mona Jamshed, and I'm going to introduce you to a series of lectures on a software engineering course called Requirements Engineering. I delivered this course to a group of students of Bachelors of Software Engineering at University of Adelaide in the year 2022. This course covers the foundation of requirements specification of a software product. I taught the course in different sections, and it started from understanding requirements specification, understanding the client's needs, analyzing those needs, testing and validation of those needs, prototyping, and management. The slides that I have used have originally been prepared by Professor Dagmar Monnet, who is a professor of computer sciences at the Berlin School of Economics and Law. She has very kindly provided these slides for teaching purposes and has also allowed the modification. So a slight modification has been done to suit the needs of the students. I've tried to teach this course in a very basic manner using everyday examples. I hope you enjoy this series and you're able to learn something about requirements engineering. Also, you will be seeing this clip at the beginning of each of the lectures that I'll be uploading under this lecture series. Happy studying.
Yes, we can see.
All good. So this now after the break, what we are going to cover this week and the next is requirements specification. And I have to tell you that these are really important lectures because it's going to cover the templates that you will be using for your projects. So a lot of theory involved, but at the same time, a little bit of practical tidbits here and there to help you. I'm going to talk about the templates that are available and that can help you fill out the specification part of the requirements engineering. So, okay. I guess this is how we begin. Now, this is the outline, the basic definition of requirements specification, followed by what are the key actions in requirement specification. We are going to touch upon the documentation templates that are available to you on my uni as well. And yeah, what are the, like the characteristics of good requirements. And at the end, we'll touch upon user stories. Now, I don't think that you are going to be making user stories in the SRS documents that are available. That's mainly based on use cases. But obviously, it's a very important concept of analyzing and specifying the requirements. So we'll touch upon that as well. And okay, now let me see. It's, yeah, okay, it's 10 to 11. So I have a good, what, 80 minutes or so. I hope I'm able to cover the first part of the specification. Okay. So yeah, so again, we begin with the process framework. Last week, I'm sorry, before the break, we touched upon the analysis part, and now we're going to touch upon specification. Now, the one thing that I always begin every lecture is that it's not that we are done with analysis and we are now going to focus on specification. It is an iterative process. We are going to do things in parallel. And, but yeah, the topic today will mainly focus on what do you do, what kind of documentation you do in specification, right? So that it can help you with your SRS documentation. So the essence of requirement specification basically is to, like to document requirements of different types in a more, so now you're bringing the requirements in a more consistent, accessible, and a reviewable way, right? Then the entire intention of this process is that the requirements are now readily understandable by your intended audiences. Now, you can do that in form of, like, there's a vision and scope document that we're going to talk about. And remember that we talked about this defining the product vision and a project like a scope document. when we were talking about requirement elicitation and we were talking about the good practices of elicitation, one of them was that we make a product vision or a project scope which talks about the high level scenario of why we are gathering these requirements. So as part of the documentation of your requirements, I want to tell you that they can be done in the form of user stories or use cases. And we mainly touch upon we try to sort of make a clarity of all the functional as well as the non-functional requirements. Okay. So now we are going to talk about the key actions in specification. So during elicitation, what we have done basically is we have collected a lot of terminologies and heavy technical jargon, maybe, from the user side. But now, in order to make them more formal, we are going to start putting them in a more comprehensible way by making use of the templates. So the first step is translating the collected user needs into written requirements and diagrams suitable for comprehension, for review, and use by the intended audience. So, we are going to cater to different types of stakeholders, making sure that they understand these requirements through the use of the documentation that we are going to use. So relationship amongst the several types of requirement information. Now this brings me to, this one. Yeah, this brings me to this slide, something that we have touched upon before as well. It talks about the various levels of requirements, the categories of requirements and how they are interrelated with each other. And yeah, so we are now going to talk about the documentation. Now, if requirements, how they're going to be sorted under the various levels of these documents. Now, as you can see, the first one, we talk about the vision and scope document. Now, the vision and scope document is the higher level document, right? It basically talks about including the business requirements, and it's developed at the highest level of abstraction. So what goes in this vision document, you can see, it can be seen here, mainly the business requirements. And if you come across further down, if you come across the user requirement document, that's at the intermediate level, and you will find that the input of the user requirements document is obviously the user requirements. Now, I read that not many companies use the user requirements document, but I think this is something that, it's quite handy, it's quite useful, because it is helping you sort of untangle the requirements that you may have gathered at the higher abstraction level from the vision and scope document. So now I think the user requirement document is not really going to touch upon a lot of technicalities, a lot of technical information. So what happens is that at this level, maybe a lot of easy to understand pictures or drawings can be used from both the client as well as from the business analyst, just to make things easy to understand as to what the client is saying. So it can be simple as drawing a user interface of the application on a pen and paper, or like on a board, just trying to clarify that what are the things that you're looking for. So for example, like when the SA government wanted to come up with a COVID safe application, so when they would have contacted these companies, and as a business analyst, you would have asked your client, the SA government, as to what exactly do you want the first steps to look like. So what are the buttons, what information, and where do you want it to appear like? So basically just talking about the user interface information rather than a lot of technical sides of it. Then we talk about the functional requirements and the non-functional requirements, which are basically going to be covered in the software requirements specification document. This is a document that you should expect all the software companies to provide, right? And it's going to talk about, I'm going to make you understand this specification level in terms of the templates that we're going to use. So let's just move on to that. Now, the vision, and that is the first template that is going to help you with the explaining the specification part. Now, we talk about the business requirement, and if you undergo all the points that are covered in business requirement, that is the background, the business opportunity, business objectives, they all tend to sort of answer the question as to why we need a product, right? So for example, if I take example of, I've told you before as well, like of an airline introducing a check-in system. So why does an airline want a check-in system? So what are the success metrics involved in it? What will be the risks involved? So any assumptions and dependencies. So sometimes, like dependency can be like a business wants to have a software when they already have, like they want to introduce a new software when they already have an existing system. So for that, they would be like dependent, they would have really specific requirements in terms of the specific programming language they want to use, specific tools they want to use, any specific environments that they want that new software to be introduced in. So all these specificities, they can be covered under the business assumptions and dependencies. So, and your client, like they may already outline this as part of the requirements from the beginning, from the very beginning when you're eliciting the requirements from your client. So business requirements, as you can see, so it basically covers the high level picture and why we are introducing this and what this new product or this new application is going to serve the business. Then we come to the scope and limitation part. And here we talk about the major features that the clients wants to see. And here we can discuss what features they want to see in the first initial release of the product, and then in the subsequent releases, what are some of the limitations and exclusions that they have highlighted or you have clarified on your behalf. And the vision and scope template also talks about the business context. Now, under business context, if you see, there's this, one of the points that's covered is project priorities. So again, I'll take that example that suppose that the SA government, now I'm not sure that it really happened, but I'm just giving you an example that when they wanted to build this COVID tracing app, so I'm assuming that, the pathway that they would have gone would have contacting all these software companies and letting them know of what they want to build. So all the software company will provide of what the software application should look like. So the government people, officials would have just given a general idea, right, as to, like they want to track where people are going, and maybe they're also going to cover what their motivation is to introduce this app. And then what they may have done is may have opened like a bidding process, and the software companies would have come up with their own ideas. So of what that COVID tracing app can look like. So you can imagine that, they would have used actually this vision and scope template to talk about that. And this template would have covered basically just the higher level value that app is going to provide them. So what is the business value of that app and what we can deliver at the highest level. So as a software company, as you may not have yet formed a team, you may not have yet figured out the details of the requirements or details of the application, but you are going to present to the government that what you have a general idea about what this app should look like, what your vision is for that app, and then they would have probably like call for a bidding process, and this is the template that you would have submitted, and based on like if they find that there's a common point between their requirements and with the template that you have submitted, they would have gone further to go ahead with making of this COVID app. So again, what I'm trying to say here is that this template is the first step, giving you a high visionary of what the application or the product that you're going to make is going to look like. And there is no technical information involved in it. And this can be like the common point for further developing the product in agreement with the client. So yeah, so I think this is like the first step for the software application process to start with. All right. I hope I'm being clear enough with this template. So if there are any questions, you can just speak up, or I can move on. All right. All right. So the SRS, here's a definition according to the textbook that's for your course. So this is how it defines that the software requirement specification is a collection of the functional as well as the non-functional requirements for a software product. So it's going to talk about all the technical part of what application is going to perform, what the user specifically needs in terms of its technical performance. At the same time, it's going to touch upon the non-functional part of it, like, for example, the security part and how it's going to perform. For example, if you're talking about a web page, how fast the page should load and all that stuff. So this leads us to this template, the SRS template. Now, in my uni, you're going to find this template that you're going to use for your project. In fact, my recommendation is that even when, in your professional career, and even as you take your courses later, which will be much more complex than this basic software course, you can use that template. It's a really good one. It really helps give you a really good outline of how things are to be covered and in what way. There's another one, I think it's called Pearls from Sand document. So that is also a helping document, basically, to cover, to fill your SRS template. So if you're having trouble with your SRS template, you can always open this document called the Pearls from Sand document. It's under the templates in my uni, and it's going to basically help you, if you're having any trouble filling out your document. So the SRS template is going to help you identify your use cases, your functional requirements, and there's a very a specific format that you have to follow for the requirements, and you have to write the use cases in a very specific format, and the use case is going to be obviously for a very particular requirement, and it also talks about, in the template, you would also see that they're talking about the prioritizing of the use cases. So it's a really good material, both the Pearls from Sand document as well as this template that they have uploaded on my uni. And it's really going to help you in writing the requirements. So remember that the target at the end of this semester is for you guys is to develop an SRS document as well as part of your project. So yeah, do take a look at that. And here I'm just going to discuss some of the basic headings that have been covered in the template. So we are going to begin with the introduction. So basically, what's the purpose is, what's the project going to be about. Document conventions mean that there will be a certain way of, you have to write the text. It will either be in italics or in bold, certain identification codes that you may have to write. And the scope is obviously that you're going to talk about what the project is about. And remember that when you are writing the SRS document, you are basically addressing the different stakeholders, okay? So this template or this document is going to address the different stakeholders, because we know that everyone is not going to be on the same page of what has been discussed in the elicitation. So it's always a good idea to have a general information put in the introduction about what the project is trying to achieve, what the scope of the project is, and what is its motivation, right? Then so that you can just, like sort of address the needs of all the different stakeholders that are involved in the project. Now, the next thing that comes in the SRS template is the overall description. And these, there are many items involved in this. This talks about the use classes, their characteristics. So, I mean, here I'm going to give you like an example. So for example, if you're trying to, like this My Uni application you have, and if you're trying to update it with a better application, you want to put some different functionalities in it. So, like just come to think what user classes there can be. So one class can be of students, the other can be like the teaching staff, and obviously the functionalities of these user classes are going to be quite different. Now, some of you may identify another user class, that is the admin. So like the admin is there basically to support the teaching staff. So this kind of information you're going to have to capture, and we have to put it in the template and in this heading under overall description. So you will also talk about, for example, the operating environment. So which operating environment you want to choose, which programming language, which tools you want to cover here. Then the system features. So that is like the functional requirements basically, and how you're going to write them down. And those requirements are going to be relevant for which specific user. So yeah, that can be covered under system features. And then we have data requirements. Now, for this course in particular, you're not going to, it's optional. Filling out the data requirements in the SRS template, that's optional. Why they have kept it optional at this time is because I think the data requirement basically it basically captures how your data is going to flow. So what do you expect to get as an input, and what do you expect to provide as an output in general? So for that, you really need to have a good understanding of the databases. So how your data is structured, what are the sources of data, and like most of the applications that we use now, they work with a lot of input from the users. So those applications, they require the users to type in the information. So users will definitely be one source of data. But at this level, what they are, like this course does not demand you to fill in the data requirements, which, like it can get a bit more logical. And for that, you would have to get a better understanding of how the database system works. Moving on, talk about the external interface requirements. Now, sometimes, like as part of your application, you may be interacting with the external applications as well. So you would have to fit in the, fit in the data that is generated through your application so that it can merge with the application of the external application as well. And yeah, under data requirements, you would also have to consider that as well, that how that data is going to be structured when you involve an external interface as well. So, okay, yeah, so so I was just talking about the external interface requirements. Another feature, sorry, that I've just mentioned here in my notes is that the data requirements not just talks about the data dictionary or the data acquisition as well, it also talks a lot about the security and privacy of the data. And that should also be covered in data requirements, right? Now, external interfaces, how your application is going to communicate externally. And when I say how it's going to communicate externally, what I mean is that partially our communication is with our users, right? And one of the ways to communicate is the user is going to communicate with the application is through the user interface. So everything that you want to cover on the appearance of your application for your user interface, that can be explained here, right? You may have drawings that or you may have some mock-ups that you can sort of capture here under this heading. So you may capture a lot of information, like which buttons you want to use, what colors you want to use for the buttons, which drop boxes, etc. So all of this can even start by drawing with hands as well, like taking a paper and pencil and drawing like that. But now there are a lot more applications that can actually provide you with a very good platform of developing these drawings. And you just need to go online on those websites and just link the buttons without really specifying what functionalities are going to take place. So on those like online platforms, what you can do is just get a snapshot of your drawings, and then you can put them in the document here. What I can do is I can later in the Slack, I can also mention some of the online platforms that are available to help you come up with these external interface requirements. Okay, now we have also talked about the hardware interface, like in the previous lectures. And sometimes we need to interact with like a specific hardware. So an example that I would like to give here is use of like a barcode at a supermarket. So if you're making like an application for a supermarket, you may have to interact with a barcode reader. So a barcode reader is basically a hardware, and it is expected that the hardware is going to, your application is going to interact with that hardware as well. So that is one of the interfaces that you should be aware of. And many of these clients, for example, many of the clients these days, they work with sensors. So, like sensors for noise, which can capture noise, or pressure sensors, or these robots that can capture the, like a still shot, and they can send it to your system as to what's happening. So if part of application involves with the hardware, then it means that we would also have to learn how to interact with the data that is generated from these, for example, from these sensors. External interface requirement also has communication interfaces. So for example, when you are going to work on your software, for example, like if you go to a new website and you need to make a login, they sometimes ask you, would you like to use your, they may ask you to connect with your LinkedIn account, or like your Facebook account or your Gmail account. So this is a kind of a communication interface where, like they would, so like an external communication interface is kind of authenticating your ID. So you may not like, you're not really going to be concerned about the authentication, that how your Gmail or how your Facebook is going to authenticate you. But by adding this functionality, you want to communicate with different external software applications for the possibility of authentication, right? So yeah, communication interface is partially about whether like we want to have an email functionality, whether we are not going to implement every single thing with the email ourselves, but we are just using an outsourced interface to provide us with the authentication functionality. So if you're going to communicate with other web applications, whether protocol or web applications, then we really have to sort out details as a developer or as a business analyst as to what APIs we are going to use, what network protocols we are going to use in order to enable that functionality. Okay, so like you can't just implement an external interface just like that. So these are like the background works that you would have to check in before you introduce an external interface functionality. So yeah, so basically what we are going to do is we're going to think about and specify, and we are going to, in this document, like write it down for our developers, so that when they start designing, they understand what exact external interfaces we are going to work on and incorporate in our product. Now, quality attributes, well, we have discussed a lot of this before as well, and I've always told you, even in my elicitation lectures, we talk that you as a business analyst has to elicit a lot of information on quality attributes as well. So the SRS template also covers this, the quality attributes. And here you're going to, you're going to decipher through your requirements and see what requirements have been are there, which talk about the performance or the security or the safety. So I'm going to just spend a little bit of time on internationalization and localization requirements here. Now, when we say internationalization, we basically, the main point is not that whether we are going to use this, application locally, or whether we are going to use this application in different countries. So what it really refers to is that, for example, like if you are going to have a software application and you only want to work in Australia, right? Or do you expect that application is going to be used in like the rest of the world, or maybe another market like in Germany? So what differences will that make to your software, right? These kind of requirements, or whether going international or localization, are going to bring some constraints as well in it. So for example, constraints can be of like a language. So for example, if your website is going to be used in Germany or in another country where English is not the first language, so you may like to have the requirement of language translation there as well. So for example, you may need like a Google Translate later as an external interface requirement. But then, there can be other things as well. For example, the currency. So if you're using Australian dollar here, so you want someone in Germany sitting there to obviously see the product that it's being sold in euros. So for example, so that's why the currency is going to hold a very different meaning when you are talking about the internationalization of your website. Another factor that I talked about was, that I was thinking about was, for example, time zones. And it just occurred to me, like, for example, in COVID, like many students returned to their home countries, and like they had to access my uni. And I think one of the requirements they would have actually sought was that, like they have the times shown to them for their, like, whatever, for their online classes or for their submission of the assessments in their local time zones. So that's something that you can also consider under this the internationalization and localization requirement as well. So, like, if you come to think of it, like there can be many factors involved in it. And that's something I think even when my uni was like first, it would have been built by the programmers, they would not have thought of that there might be a need where there would be a requirement of student accessing my uni from outside Australia. So, so yeah, so when you're working on your project, do make sure that if these requirements are going to be incorporated in your specification document. So yeah, other than that, I think when it talks about other requirements, like basically you have touched upon your business requirements, you have talked about the system requirements, like the system features, you have talked about your user classes, how the users want that interaction with the system to take place. And I think, yeah, other than that, something that is not covered can come under other requirements. I really couldn't think of any particular example to give under this, but I think if you have discussed about the functionality, the quality, the interface requirements, and the system features, and obviously the big picture, then you have mainly covered a lot about the SRS. You've covered a lot in the SRS template. So moving on, what I'm going to do is that on Slack, I'm going to share the link for the SRS template that is actually already available on the My Uni, as well as the Pearls to SAN document, which is a really helpful document to fill out your SRS template. And you can go through that as well. Other than that, yeah, I talked about, I may provide you some online links that can help you with drawing of the user requirements and uploading them on your template as well. Okay. Now, we move on to the next step, which is what are the characteristics of good requirements? And yeah, this is what we are going to cover. These are the many features that a good requirement must have. It's all quite theoretical, but what I can make you understand at this stage is that it's all going to be really useful for you in, as you go ahead with your your further courses, and as your core studies are going to become more complex as well. And if you're going for like a specific software engineering degree, so knowing about them and incorporating them in your SRS template is going to be really helpful. But for now, just brace yourself for a lot of theory involved there in it. So, yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. So this is the quality criteria for the requirements. And the first one that they have highlighted here is being comprehensive. So comprehensive, as the word itself, it's showing that every single requirement must describe the call for and the deliverable functionality in full. So basically, it says that just make sure that no detail has been left out. And obviously, at the same time, taking into consideration that you're not adding any superfluous requirements. So making sure that all those requirements that are filling out the highest level of the business requirement and the user requirements, they are incorporated there. And yeah, all the details are related to all the details which are connected to your business objectives are mentioned in your requirements. At the same time, I can tell you that this may not be like a criteria for your client. They are not going to talk about a lot of that, like a lot of the quality criteria of the requirements. But for you, as your role in business analyst, it's your job to make sure that the requirements that you are gathering and you're going to analyze on has these quality criteria met. Okay. Now, apart from being comprehensive, your requirements must also be correct. So we go through the, when you talk about the requirement elicitation process, what happens is that we go through an entire process of gathering the requirements. But whether we have like a correct understanding of the requirements, and if you remember, like in requirement elicitation, we discussed a really good practice for requirements gathering, and that was that you make your client proofread the requirements. So a good way of making sure that your requirements are correct is that always getting back to your client and making sure that if they understand it, and if whatever you have written or your understanding of the requirements is the same as theirs, so that they get more verified, and so that there is a higher chance of a good quality product at the end of this stage. Okay, quality criteria for requirements, the next one we are going to talk about is a requirement has to be valid and current. So it is possible, like if you're gathering requirements and if there's a project that you have taken over and it's spanned over 2 to 3 years. So what can happen is that, like through the changes over these years, you may realize that there are requirements which were actually valid at the beginning of the project, but they are not valid anymore. And there are changes that are needed to be made in the requirements. So this is something that it's something that is really based on real practice. It actually happens, making sure that the requirements that you have are valid and current. So if you, like the version of the requirements that you had gathered from the users in the beginning, they may differ, they may undergo some changes as you go through multiple changes, multiple versions of this application that you're working on, okay? So it's a really good practice, and I would highly recommend that you adopt this practice and make sure that your requirements are quite valid and current, and they are representative of the systems, the final systems reality, So just making sure that any version of the product that you're working on, it reflects the valid and the current requirements. And yeah, basically just you instill all the changes that you are like you are making in your requirement gathering with time. That is also shown in by making changes in these requirements. Okay, the next one is agreed upon. Obviously, that was again something that we touched upon a lot in requirement elicitation, where we said that it has to be agreed upon by all stakeholders. But then on practical basis, we also know that there would be times when there is like a conflict amongst the stakeholders on requirements. So for example, taking that example of making a software for the My Uni, now there are stakeholders such as your students, your admin, your teachers. So there may arise some conflict, right? So how do you work with these conflicts is your responsibility, because before you hand on it to your developers, you need to make sure that these requirements have been agreed upon by the stakeholders. And sometimes what happens is that it's your developer that identifies that there is a conflict coming in the requirements. So you can always go back to your stakeholders and making sure that you have them agreed upon and that they are correct and valid to work on. All right, okay. So the next is necessary. Again, it refers to the requirement elicitation, where we said that sometimes what happens is that when you go for requirement elicitation, sometimes your clients' representatives, if there is anyone who's quite overexcited and enthusiastic with the idea of their needs for a new a software or an app that they want to introduce, they may overload you with what is necessary, with more than what is necessary. So as a business analyst, your job would be to make sure that you incorporate only what is necessary. And they may do a lot of like beating around the bush, but it is your job to see that what they are saying, is that adding value to the business objectives or not, right? And if it is not, then you can always get back to them and make them explain that how you don't see this requirement as a necessary requirement. So I guess this should have been, it also asks for a lot of patience on part of the business analyst when you're working with your clients. And your main goal basically is to help your developers as much as possible. So if you're able to sort of fulfill this whole entire criteria for requirements, it's going to be a win-win situation for both you and your client. Making them understandable, so that brings into creating a common language for all the involved. So basically you're saying is that all the terminologies that you may introduce, they are in refining the user's requirement, the users understand what they mean, and they are on the same page that yes, what they said in their layman language is exactly what you are trying to tell them. So yeah, understandable by all the stakeholders, a common language for everyone, for different stakeholders, not just for the users, even for someone who has an indirect use of the softwares that you're building, has an understanding of the language that is being used in the requirements. Okay, so traceable. Now, it says that every requirement must be uniquely identifiable. Now, I can help you explain this with, like the example of your university. So how does the university traces us? So for example, in my role as a teacher, yours as a student or an admin, what do you think is the main, how can they easily trace us? So I think most of you would probably say that, it's, we all have a unique ID, and that is how we are uniquely identifiable. So when it comes to requirements, tracing the requirements, we follow the same thing. So basically what we say is that each of the requirements is given a specific ID, and why it's a good quality criteria for requirements is because sometimes you work on projects which are quite large scale, and you're going to gather like hundreds of requirements. And for that to sort of follow through them through the end of the entire process framework, you need to attach a unique ID to them, right? So basically you put a clear ID and you trace it through the entire process. And not just you in your role as a business analyst, this unique ID is going to be carried over by the developers as well. So they understand that this ID number, this is, we have to incorporate in our in the system, and even for the testers. So as part of your software company, the ID that is attached to the requirement at the beginning of the recitation phase is going to carry through all the analyses, the specification, the validation part, the testing of it. So traceability, again, a very good and a very important criteria for the requirements. And a very good advantage that traceability gives you is when it comes to debugging your application. So for example, you come up with your your first release of the requirement of your product, and you take it to your client, and then there's something that they highlight that this exactly was not my requirement. So just imagine how much advantage you have when you already have a unique ID attached to that requirement, and that is going to help your developers, your testers sort of debug the software application by following through that particular requirement journey as to where things went wrong. So, I think it's a really important step that a business analyst can even talk to your clients as well. You can let them know as well that this is how we are going to work with the clients by attaching, with our requirements by attaching this unique ID, so that we can make the traceability quite easy for us. The traceability part, as I said, is going to help you a lot in your issue tracking of any bugs that may arise. And I've written in my notes here that I can easily, for example, when the SRS document comes to your developers team, so the requirements would already have for example, an ID attached to them, and then each developer is, for example, is entitled to work on a different requirement, has a unique ID that they are working on. So when it comes to the issue tracking system, it really becomes easy for the developer team to sort of locate that issue and work on it. So yeah, traceability is a really important criteria, and giving it a unique identification, every requirement, a unique identification is going to help you a lot. Now, okay. Rating of the requirements is basically how you prioritize your requirements. And again, you know, when you talk about priority, you're talking about what your client prioritizes. So when you gather the requirements and you're sort of deconstructing them into functional and non-functional requirements, you are also rating them as to what is more important, what is more associated with the client objectives, and what is sort of to be released in the initial release. So I think it's a really handy component for systems that are quite complex or large. And it's really important that you have a clear idea of the priority of your requirements. And if there is any clarification that is to be needed, you can always get back to your clients and seek clarification on their priority. So rating here basically is talking about asking your client specifically what is their priority for the requirements. Okay, the next is implementable. Implementable is basically that, you know, like you don't promise something that you cannot deliver. So whatever is something that you can't deliver, your developers team don't have the skills for it, you can't put that under your requirements. So so a good way of looking at it is, for example, in your role as a business analyst, sometimes you may have, like if you are given a job of a business analyst, and if you're doing a software engineering degree, so you would have a really good idea of the technicalities involved in requirements elicitation, and you are able to sort of transfer that to your developers team as well, because you have a good technical sound background of it. But just imagine that if somebody is in the role of a business analyst and they have a background of, say, medicine, so they may not be really, they may not have a good understanding of the software engineering. And for that, it is really important for the business analyst to clarify that the requirements that they're with their developers team as well, that are these requirements implementable or not. So I think the kind of backgrounds that we bring in our jobs, that really contributes to the kind of performance that we do in our job roles. So somebody with a technical sound background would be more at ease to discuss with the developers team as to how these requirements can be implemented, versus someone who is of a non-software engineering background. So implementable for the BA, for a business analyst who has a non-technical background, it's a really important criteria that they should incorporate in their role. And they need to make sure that whatever they are promising with the client is actually implementable by the developers as well. Okay, so consistent is, consistent will come up that there is no conflicts involved amongst the stakeholders on the requirements. So this is something that you can talk about at the highest level, at the abstraction level. When you are gathering the requirements, you need to make sure that the requirements are consistent with the business objectives, the big picture level. At the same time, there are no requirements that are in conflict with each other. Now, like in practical scenarios, there is no way that you can't come across with requirements that are going to be consistent all throughout. So you every time remember to get back to your clients to make sure that consistency is maintained for the requirements. Okay. Next is classifiable. Classifiable will be, so for example, if you're working on a project that is related to Australia Defence, so everything, the requirements that you're going to gather, they would be classified, and the categories that you're going to make up of those requirements also need to be classified. So really judging the nature of the project that you're working on, and ensuring that you have this quality criteria attached to that nature of the project that you're working on. So as I gave you an example, like, and I think South Australia here, they do a lot of projects, software projects for Australia Defence. So that is something I'm sure that the software engineers that are working on those projects will incorporate in their quality criteria. Okay. So testable. A requirement must be formulated in a way that it can be tested. That means that it should be possible to prove any functionality requested by a requirement. So So basically, write your requirement in a way that it can be tested and it can be ticked off, right? Just if I ask you, you're in a business analyst role, but if you put yourself in the shoes of a tester and you see that the requirements, for example, that I'm gathering on the functionality, are they going to be easily testable by my testing team as well? If it's not, if it's like a non-functional requirement, like if you're talking about performance and security, so you have to see that as well. So both the functional and non-functional requirements you have to write in a measurable way with a clear traceability ID attached to it, so that the tester can make sure that they have tested it and it is possible to be tested, and that if there are any issues related to it, it can always be referred back to the client. So obviously, like if there is no testing involved, obviously that cannot be put out for the release to the client. So while you are formulating the requirements, make sure that you are also able to think from the tester's point of view, that the way I'm collecting the functional as well as the non-functional requirements, I have to make sure that these can be tested as well. Like as I told you, for example, for testing of a web page on a website, for example, you may say that, okay, we may see that how many seconds does it take for a web page to load. So that is another important criteria. And lastly, obviously, nothing is possible if there is any ambiguity involved in it. And ambiguous, requirements at the very beginning, they lead to a totally flop project, and that's obviously not good for both the client as well as for the software company. So we really want to make sure that we are writing the requirements in a way that can not be misinterpreted, right? So the choice of words matter a lot while we are writing the reports. So we don't want our developers, and there will be different, in your developers team, there will be people working under different roles. So just making sure that there is no ambiguity involved, and that all the developers don't end up getting a different meaning of the requirements, because that's a disaster for yourselves. So removing all the ambiguity, and making sure that everything is consistent, there is no conflict going on, and that it is not misinterpreted. So I think in your the course book, they also have this, it's not a chapter, but I'm going to mention that as well, where they're talking about the kind of language that you can use to fill in your templates, to making sure that it is easy, understandable to read. So you're not going to include a lot of technical jargon or a lot of complex vocabulary that is going to make things difficult for both the client as well as for your developers team. So making sure that the requirements are easy to understand, they are quite consistent, and they are specific. So that, in a nutshell, is the quality criteria. As I said, it's a lot of theory, but as you are making your SRS template, say for this course project, just make sure that you are able to include as much of these criteria as possible, right? Okay. Yeah, so that's a comic strip. So basically, it talks about, like, I mean, how you deal with a client and how basically, you know, like sometimes, and actually most of the times what happens is that the clients themselves don't know what they want. And I'll just go through it. It says that I will need to know your requirements before I start to design the software. So she asks the client that, first of all, what are you trying to accomplish? And now that's just a comical take on the situation, that I'm trying to make you design my software. Well, I mean, what are you trying to accomplish with this software? I won't know what I can accomplish until you tell me what the software can do. So, and then she like, try to get this concept through your thick skull. The software can do whatever I design it to do. And then it ends up with saying that, can you design it to tell you my requirements? So basically just highlighting that this clients sometimes, you know, I think they, let's just put it this way, that they do know what they want, but they don't know how to, maybe sometimes they have difficulty in putting out their needs, you know, like their requirements. So for example, just think that if your client is somebody like farmers from an agriculture background, and they want to come up with this app, so what sort of like their way of explaining things, you know, and they would have no idea of what, and they have no like background of working on an app or any software application as such. So for them to come up with the requirements would be a hard task. So they obviously have no idea what their software is going to end up look like. So again, it is your job as a business analyst to sort of put yourself in their shoes and talk to them in their language, and you know, because you need to get your job done of collecting the requirements. You cannot just leave the situation in a stalemate where there's no progress being done. So you have to be very patient, and you have to sort of get into their shoes and think from their perspective and ask them questions, you know, like design your elicitation sessions in a way where they are able to tell you what exactly they want. So, and, you know, like we also touched upon, like there can be some playful techniques that you can work with your clients. So for example, you can do drawings, if they are unable to come up with words, so you can draw for them and ask them that what they are looking for. And I think visuals and drawings are a great way to sort of break through the ice and come up with more informative and useful ideas. Okay, so we still have, yeah, okay, another 8 minutes left. So I'm going to move on to user stories. Now, user stories, even though they are not part of your the SRS template that you're going to fill in, but they are a way of describing the user's requirements. So in your SRS template, you're going to work on use cases, but here, for your knowledge and information, we are going to touch upon user stories as well. So your course book, they define user story as a format to capture the user requirements on agile projects in the form of 1 or 2 sentences that articulate a user need or describe a unit of desired functionality, as well as stating the benefit of the functionality to the user. So for example, now we'll work through an example here. Now, what happens is, for example, like if you have a use case which says check in for a flight, like if there's an airline and they have introduced a check-in system, an online check-in system. So the use case can just narrate, online check-in for the flight. But the user story is more about, it talks to the language of the user, right? It doesn't go into a lot of technicalities. It talks in a very simple, plain language. So the user story for a use case, which is like check-in online, check-in for a flight, can be that as a passenger, what my role is, that I'm a passenger, I want to check in for a flight, what my need is, so that I can board the plane, my airplane. That's my motivation. So the user story is basically like, a very common way of writing a user story is the role, what the role is, and then what objective it is, and why, what's the motivation behind it. So my role as a passenger, my objective is that I want to do an online check-in for the flight, and my motivation is that I want to board the airplane. So user story, I think it's different from use cases in a way that it has no technical language involved, and it just focuses on one single functionality of the user. And in Agile project, I want to just talk about that as well. You will see that a lot of requirement gathering is not product centered, rather it's more on the focus is more on the user's requirements. So user story is a really good fit for Agile projects. It also helps to sort of work, like in this user story, you can always keep on adding with time as the needs of the project change. So if you're working on an Agile project and as the requirements are changed, maybe you have to add something or delete something, a user story showing the single functionality is a really nice and easy way to incorporate those changes. Now, there's another definition that has been put up here. So it says here that a user story describes the functionality, and that functionality basically is going to be quite valuable to either a user or a purchaser of a system. So when I said that as a passenger, I want to do an online check-in, and why? Because what's the value for that? So that I can board my plane. So you see, as I said, a lot of focus is on the perspective of the users, what they want to accomplish, rather than like the product-centric perspective. So I think they because they're quite simple and easy to use, they have a lot of like advantages as well. They are quite precise. So because they use like a common language, like a verbal communication that you do. So it can be, for example, if you are in Uber, like I saw another example here, it said that as an Uber passenger, I want to see several available drivers in my area, right? That's my objective. So that, what is the motivation? I can choose the closest one to me. So when I read these sentences, to me, they look like when we are communicating verbally with each other. And it's not just that, I find them quite precise as well, right? So, and that's what a user story does. It takes a single functionality and it focuses on making it quite precise because of its very easy to use language. Okay. Another thing that they say that advantage of user stories is that they are quite easy for planning. I've touched upon it again. User stories are written so that each can be given an estimate. So when you write a user story, your developer is going to get an estimate of how difficult or how time consuming it will be to develop, right? Use cases, on the other hand, are generally too large to be given useful estimates. Now, another thing that you have to sort of see is that, it's not really important who writes the user story. It can be you as a business analyst. You can even teach it to your client, and you can even, your developers can also come up with user stories. So the idea behind is that you are simplifying the user requirement. So I think more than who makes a user story, it's more about what's in a user story and how it can help you. So here it talks about, it says that they are composed of a written description, which is used for planning. And then there are conversations which are fleshed out of that description, right? So there may be that conversation can be like an acceptance criteria that you want. So for example, I say that if I'm as a customer, I'm logging onto an online web shop, I say that when I shop, I'm able to, as a shopper, as a customer, when I want to buy stuff on this website using my MasterCard so that I can complete my shopping, right? So that I'm able to buy the stuff from the website. Now, this user story can lead to a lot of conversations as well. When I say my card, so, as a business analyst or as a developer, you can say, okay, we need to further elaborate on what this my card is accepted requirement is. So, then you can come up with an acceptance criteria. So, for example, a MasterCard or a Visa card can be incorporated in it, or an American card or a PayPal payment system is there. So that's how, by incorporating an acceptance criteria. Now, this is something you will do later, right? A user story has come up from your client saying that I want my customers to be able to use their card to do their shopping. And now, as a business analyst or with the help of your developers, you are trying to flesh out more details. More conversations are coming out of this story that, okay, what can we do to make this possible, right? So the acceptance criteria that you come up with in order to make sure that a client's card is accepted for shopping, it helps us validate the implementation. It helps us to implement that user story and make that story confirm, right? So you can tick off that user requirement that customers are able to shop with whichever card they're using to finish their shopping. So this is a criterion for a good user story. Now, okay, I can also see that it's already 12. There's not much left of user story. So you see, here I'm referring to the conversations that come out of the description of the user story line that we write. We can touch upon this again in the next session. And yeah, we can talk about how from a simple line of a person's role, what their objective is, why they are motivated to fulfill that objective, we can actually elicit a lot of conversation back end to see what exactly can be incorporated to fulfill that requirement. So the front of a story card is this, and then the back of the story card is all about testing, and the testers will make sure that they test, like the Visa card is accepted, MasterCard, Diners Club, and the expired cards, they are going to incorporate all these changes, all these characteristics in that requirement of customer being able to shop with a credit card. And I'll briefly touch upon the user story, what the characteristics of a good user story are. So we are going to start from here next week. And I believe that's all for today's session. I'm going to end the recording so that it can be uploaded on my uni. And I'm also going to make a general announcement on Slack for the templates that are available and any handy thing that I find. Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm sorry I was a bit, not in a flow in the beginning, but yeah, I hope I'm able to put across some thoughts. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.